This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Prior to its release, few movies or series had those who grew up in the 80s quite as hyped as Masters of the Universe Revelation. The He-Man revival promised audiences it was made by the fans for the fans, and that it would continue the story from where the original Filmation series left off. The dormant love that countless audiences still have for He-Man was rekindled, and the hype was real. Netflix made the call to split up Season 1 into 2 parts, and upon its release, Season 1 broke the Netflix top 10, because this was a big deal. But rather than to live up to its promise, Season 1 Part 1 subverted expectations in ways not seen since Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy's crowning achievement, Star Wars The Last Jedi. The audience subsequently recoiled, and by the time Part 2 was released a few months later, there wasn't enough interest left for it to even crack the top 10. The size of the He-Man fanbase that materialized for Season 1 Part 1 demonstrates that there clearly is an audience, and that they're hungry for more Masters of the Universe. But Revelation evidently did not give them what they were looking for. Case in point, it would appear that no one save Kevin Smith himself are asking for a Season 2. Something went wrong along the way, and in this franchise retrospective and Revelation postmortem, we will explore what that was. In order to fully appreciate that, however, there is a lot of context to establish first. We will therefore begin by going through the origins of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, including the legal battles with the rights holders of Conan the Barbarian, and the beginnings of the corporate and rights issues which would culminate in Kevin Smith's Masters of the Universe Revelation. Throughout this video, we'll be comparing the different He-Man iterations made by different storytellers across the years, all of whom are accomplished professionals, but with wildly different approaches to the material. That is, after all, what creativity is all about, and if that inspires you to explore your own creativity, then that's where Skillshare comes into the picture, and they have you covered. Skillshare, this video sponsor, is an online learning community for creatives where you can explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity to find your way. Skillshare offers classes in topics such as music, photography, film and video production, creative writing, entrepreneurship, and freelancing. Whether you're just starting out or you're already a working creative wanting to up your game, Skillshare has classes to fit your skill level and your schedule. Classes are usually under 60 minutes and include a combination of video lessons and a class project, enabling you to quickly acquire new skills. For instance, say you want to become a YouTuber, or you're already one trying to grow your channel despite the algorithm seemingly working against you. Then the 12 lessons in the class YouTube Analytics and SEO Masterclass rank number 1 on YouTube with Nader Najad is for you. Since Skillshare sponsors this video, we naturally have a deal for you. The first 1,000 of our subscribers to click on the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. So click the link in the description to sign up, and then we'll get into why Revelation deviated so markedly from any past Masters of the Universe iteration. Doing that, however, requires establishing some context. One thing that, to many, will forever mar the Masters of the Universe brand was that it started out not as a book or as a comic, but as a toy line. The origins and rise and fall of the toy line and the brand at large is covered in Randall Lobb's 2017 documentary Power of Grayskull, the definitive history of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and I highly recommend you check it out for more details. To make a long story short though, and to add some new information not in it or most other official sources, the brand managers and talented creators at Mattel, most notably Mark Taylor and Roger Sweet, were tasked with making a new toy line for boys. You see, underestimating that market, Mattel had passed on the opportunity to make a toy line for Star Wars, while one of their former employees, who had gone rogue and started Kenner, had taken George Lucas up on the offer. To say Mattel were bitter about it is putting it lightly. And so, they were trying to make something which would do for them what Star Wars had done for Kenner. After some back and forth, the creatives came up with the toy line built around a hybrid Jack Kirby's Fourth World and Conan the Barbarian-ish sword and sorcery sci-fi fantasy setting. It just so happened that Mattel had already worked on a toy line for the Fourth World that never happened, so some ideas could be recycled from there. Similarities between Zodak and Metron, for instance, should be readily apparent. The biggest visual influence, though, was the barbarian imagery first and foremost associated with Conan. To say that Frank Frazetta's artwork from the Conan books and Earl Norham's artwork from the Savage Sword of Conan magazines served as an inspiration is something of an understatement. The image you're now seeing on screen is frequently credited as Mark Taylor's very first He-Man sketch. To be more accurate, according to the Battle Ram blog, the Power and the Honor Foundation's Emiliano Santa Lucia maintains this is in fact Taylor's sketch of Conan the Barbarian, for Mattel's Conan toy line that never happened. This would be the toy line we referenced in our Ultimate Conan the Barbarian retrospective. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Anyway, this depiction of what is clearly Conan served as the starting point from which the He-Man we know and love today would eventually evolve. But that took a few more iterations. By the time Wave 1 of the toy line was released, He-Man had found his look. He had a friendlier face than Conan, his hair was blonde, just like that of Mattel executive Tom Kalinske, and he had a shield, a battle axe, a sword, and a harness, featuring the depiction of the Templar cross. According to the mini-comic that came with the toy, He-Man didn't have any of this to begin with though. Still like Conan, this He-Man started out as a barbarian who left his village in search for adventure when he stumbled upon these treasures in a cave. And from there, he was introduced to the other heroes and villains of the toy line's first wave. Of course, this origin wouldn't last. Before long, He-Man the Barbarian would be locked up in Mattel's vaults, right next to He-Man the blatant Conan ripoff. Next, Mattel hired DC Comics to increase the toy line's exposure, and their contributions included ditching the Barbarian backstory for good, instead giving He-Man the dual identity of Prince Adam. But just because He-Man had shed off some more of Conan the Barbarian, doesn't mean that Conan was done with He-Man. In 1984, Conan Properties Inc. sued Mattel for copyright infringement, trademark infringement, unfair competition, dilution, breach of contract, and fraud. When we on the outside are able to spot the similarities between He-Man and Conan, you can rest assured the then owners of Conan the Barbarian were able to spot them too. Case in point, their complaint argued that just because you put a blonde wig on Conan doesn't mean he's suddenly not Conan. But it goes deeper than that. In early 1980, Conan Properties Inc. entered talks with Mattel about making a toy line for the upcoming feature film Conan the Barbarian, directed by John Milius and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. To this end, Mattel were provided with a treasure trove of character designs and more, of everything from Conan himself to the Snake Man and Thulsa Doom, before John Milius had merged the latter two into one in rewrites. At this time, Mattel were already in the very early stages of developing what would become He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. In a memorandum dated April 24th of 1981, which was submitted to the court as evidence, Mattel's then senior vice president of marketing and sales, Tom Kalinske, the same man He-Man's blonde hair eventually would come from, urged his colleagues to negotiate hard for the Conan license because, and I quote, "If the movie becomes popular, even though it's rated R, or the possible TV series becomes a reality in late '82, the trade could well react more strongly to the Conan line than the He-Man line, or at least be confused as to where their emphasis should be. This could well cause the failure of our line. We can't allow this to occur." The agreement between Mattel and Conan Properties was subsequently signed in the summer of 1981. In their lawsuit, Conan Properties essentially argued that Mattel were intent on ripping off Conan the Barbarian anyway, due to the popularity of the books and the Marvel comics. They further argue that when Mattel then learned of the Conan movie entering development and Conan Properties looking for someone to make a toy line for it, Mattel swooped in to obtain the license. Not because they ever planned on releasing the toy line, but because they wanted to occupy the rights long enough that no one else would have time to make a Conan toy line to compete with their own He-Man toy line. Supporting this claim was the timeline of events. The first wave of Masters of the Universe toys was released in February of 1982, while the licensing deal with Conan Properties ended just a couple of weeks before, in January of 1982, and it ended at Mattel's request. According to the agreement ending the license agreement, Mattel were supposed to hand over every mold and every design developed for the Conan toy line, which they did not do. From the outside looking in, you would think Conan Properties had a strong case, and the matter languished in court for years. In the end, however, Conan Properties weren't able to meet the burden of evidence required to win out, so Mattel got away with it. This was all going on in the background while the Masters of the Universe brand went from strength to strength. So let's get back to where we left off, the DC Comics, which had left out He-Man's barbarian origin and made him Prince Adam. But Mattel wanted an even bigger push for the toy line than an extremely limited DC series. One of the first things the Reagan administration had done in 1981 was deregulate restrictions in advertisements aimed at children, which made it possible to make an animated series specifically to advertise a toy line to children. The Transformers, G.I. Joe, Mask, and many others would do so later, but Mattel were the first, with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And to make the series, they enlisted the services of famed animation studio Filmation and its founder Lou Scheimer. This is when magic happened. The importance of what Lou Scheimer and Filmation did cannot be overstated. To summarize Masters of the Universe before Filmation entered the picture, the creatives at Mattel had Frankenstein together a toy line using bits from Conan, bits from Jack Kirby's Fourth World, bits of the Big Jim toy line, and other spare parts they had lying around. And then they stitched it all together with a lot of beer, possibly a bit of weed and more, and they did it all while having a laugh at all the silly character names they came up with. At this point, anyone who looks down on the Motu brand for its lack of artistic merit, they kind of have a point. But then came Lou Scheimer and his team at Filmation, and that team was, for what it's worth, a diverse team, and they imbued Mattel's creation with life.
Lou Scheimer called me and said, "We got 10 minutes of He-Man, you want to come see it?" And I said, "Sure." And I go and I sit with Lou, and big screen, and he says, "Roll it." I can't believe it. To me, it was all of this bullshit that we had come up with, and then all of a sudden it's part of the story, and now he's live on the screen. I said, "Lou, this is gonna be a hit." And he says, I know.
Filmation used the Mattel character designs, and they used the best parts of the various origin stories from the mini-comics that came with the toys and the DC comics. And then they created a series bible in which the backstory of the world and the characters and their motivations were fleshed out. In bringing the characters to life in animation, they used rotoscoping, in which they hired actual bodybuilders and fitness enthusiasts to act out key moves, which they then traced and more or less animated on top of. This way, both the male and female characters in the Filmation series ended up having more realistic body proportions than either the toys or other animated series, as well as fluid and natural movements. The downside to this was that over the course of 130 episodes, 223 if you include the original She-Ra series, you would inevitably see the same bits of animation reused. For this, the series has been unfairly criticized for overuse of stock animation. And yes, I do think it's unfair. Firstly, there was no other way to produce as many episodes in as short a time span as was done here. Secondly, everyone in the industry does it. Even Disney recycled animation for their event animated features, and there could be years between each new one of those. But even if many episodes were made, great care went into crafting each and every one of them. Beyond Mattel's characters from the toys, Filmation would also create a whole slew of new characters for the animated series, such as Orko. Talented writers and directors, like among others Hal Sutherland, Larry DeTilio, and D.C. Fontana of original Star Trek fame and J. Michael Straczynski of later Babylon 5 fame, were brought in to write the stories. Paul Dini, who would later go on to create Harley Quinn, would even credit the interaction he wrote between Teela and Evelyn as being the precursor for the relation between Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy in Batman the Animated Series. The stories were action-filled adventures, but always with a subtext and a moral or other life lesson that could be extracted from it, and this was emphasized at the end of each episode. These messages were always pro-social. In a sense, the series taught kids morals and good decision-making, and prepared young boys to one day become responsible men. While most episodes were standalone, there were recurring storylines, such as Teela being the daughter of the sorceress and destined to be the next one. And there were subtle cues that could be followed up on later, such as Queen Marlena, unbeknown to anyone else, having figured out that her son is indeed He-Man. The Masters of the Universe had a spotty start at Mattel, but Filmation elevated the brand to a whole new level. Because of what Filmation brought to the table, the Motu brand today has no less artistic value or merit than any other comic book property. Commercially, the Filmation series was an instant worldwide hit, and I submit the reason He-Man is remembered today is more so because of the Filmation series than the Mattel toy line itself. And because of the Filmation series, the Mattel toy line skyrocketed in popularity in ways no one had dreamt possible for a few years. Then it all came to a crashing halt, and in the process, rights issues that would eventually tear the franchise apart first made their appearance. But just like Netflix split up Season 1 of Revelation, we're splitting up this video on a cliffhanger as well. Join us in Part 2 for more revelations about She-Ra and the movie, which all ties into what happened with Masters of the Universe Revelation and what is still to come regarding the He-Man rights. So do check back for Part 2 very soon. If you haven't done so already, make sure you like this video, subscribe and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss out. For now, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and before you go, if you feel inspired, remember to click the link in the description so you too can explore your creativity. And be among the 1,000 to get a 1-month free trial of Premium Skillshare membership.